My journey to becoming an artist was a long one. I in grade school, I was always good at art, but I didn't think of it as a thing to do. Um, I was interested in comic books, and that kind of led to an interest in storytelling, which led me more toward English and writing rather than art, though art was always something that I was doing as a hobby. And um, I kind of bounced around school for probably 10 years after graduating high school, and at some point just realized that like this thing that I'd been doing in the background all the time was the thing that I should be doing.
I grew up um, I grew up skateboarding and like taking pictures of my friends. And when I went to college, I initially started as secondary English education major, and I had a minor in photography because like I still wanted to like take pictures of skateboarding, and images of that culture were images I was engaged with and like used to looking at. And I was taking a history of photography class, and we were talking about Robert Frank's The Americans. Um, and it was through like learning that, and like I could use photography as a tool to talk about what I want to talk about, or look at uh, things the way that I want to look at them. Like learning the history of the why, not just the how, in the history of photography. I fell in love with it, and that's when I was like, I want to do this.
I think my whole life, I've been drawing since I was a little kid. I think I went through a period where I was in denial of that, thinking I had to have a good job. But in college, I ended up being an art major. But then I did go through about 10 years after graduating, um, with a day job in broadcast television, until I found that, I really didn't enjoy that very much and went back into the arts. Yeah.
And what was your education
I
like?
started off as a secondary English education major, and like at the end of the day, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that like learning photography and spending time in the darkroom, um, I really enjoyed it, and that was like something that like I always felt myself coming back to, no matter like what I was doing, or how on the fence I would have been. And I had a fantastic undergraduate teacher by the name of Nico Kalianiotis. He's a photographer, a documentary photographer. He works in Greece now, but he was working in northeastern Pennsylvania, where I'm from. And he was the one who was the instructor for that history of photography class. And little by little, it was like him somewhat seeing I had an eye for it. He pushed me to find a voice or an eye of my own. Coming into my senior year of undergrad, I really felt like my work, I really felt like I was just starting to like knock on the door of some ideas artistically, and knew that I didn't want to just like stop and like try and find a job doing something. Like I knew I wanted to continue my research. I wanted to continue creating work. I wanted to continue having work critiqued. And then coming out, I was like, I want to go to grad school and I want to be a teacher. And I can only hope that, other students coming into a photo program or in a visual art program, I only hope that I can give them experience and education that I had, where I was like, wow, like this is awesome. I can photograph the world around me, and my experience is valuable. And then moving to Atlanta, I mean, I had no idea like what direction the work would go. I was new to Atlanta. I was new to the South. I began to like, I don't know, venture outside of my comfort zone in grad school. And I feel like I was like ready for that.
I spent a lot of time bouncing around. After high school, I spent about 10 years going from community college to community college and working full time and classes part time and just kind of figuring things out. Got to see a lot of different things and study a lot of different things before I hit the point where I was ready to focus and to do the art thing. At which point I moved to Savannah, Georgia. I got my undergrad in painting at the Savannah College of Art and Design there in Savannah. that was a big change from community college and not focusing on anything, because it's kind of thrown in just fully to uh, learning everything that I possibly can about art. And I think the thing that I liked most there was that I was surrounded by really great, really skilled artists with amazing ideas. Having all these great people around me pushed me to kind of do the best work that I could. After I got my BFA, I wanted to really get away from that to a really small research university for my graduate degree. Um, so I really shifted from being surrounded by all of these people doing all of these wild things that I don't really get to look that closely at, to being in a grad program with in my year there were 5 other students studying visual art in general. Um, so it was really small and close knit, and we got to have a bit more of the community of sharing ideas and supporting each other. It was a bit quieter, a bit slower. Had the opportunity to really kind of dig into. At the time, I was super interested in art history and stories again, the stories of artists in the past and how they overlap and interconnect with each other from different time periods and different places was really fascinating to me. I, as I was finishing up my undergrad, I wasn't convinced that I was going to go to grad school. Um, Unlike Parker, I wasn't thinking at that time of teaching. That was like the furthest thing from my mind. Like I had no interest whatsoever. Um, I guess I just got the feeling that I needed to continue, kind of hit something that I felt I needed to continue doing, and also felt like I needed support there versus just trying to go find a studio and continue on my own. It felt like there was more learning to do. Washington State, it was completely, I mean, my major was in painting, but that was just a word on the transcript. Basically, they really pushed for interdisciplinary and really doing and working with whatever you wanted to work with. I definitely still kept a foot in painting. Everything I did had something to do with paint. But it pushed me to explore a little bit more installation, and think about the space that an artwork occupies rather than just the frame and the space represented in a painting.
You mean at the college level or earlier?
Well, not necessarily. Um, you could start anywhere you want. I think of this really broadly as how did you learn to like do what you do?
Okay. Well, I think I could go back to maybe high school where I was really interested in drawing comic books. And I think there's still a lot of influence on the way I photograph based on like the comic book panels that I grew up with, because I really like to capture action, and I've always paid a lot of attention to composition. College was more of a classical education, drawing from the live figure and painting, printmaking, more lots and lots of drawing, typography. It really wasn't until much later in life, after working in television, that I just started doing things without trying to worry about what other people thought about what I was doing. And I had a lot more success that way. But I am constantly looking for new influences. I can find them in museums. I can find them in cartoons. I can find them in old photographs, in junk shops, literature, music. I'm constantly looking and listening for new ideas.
How did you come to the ideas that led you to make the work that's going to be in this show?
With this project, it's divided into 2 parts. There's the first part, part 1, which is titled Two Cardinals in the Thicket, and then part 2, which is the desegregation series. And one of the reasons why I kept them together is specifically just like sticking to the region. I was really interested in this idea of like the identity of a landscape and how like we, I don't know, experience or look at the world around us. Um, with part two, the desegregation series, I was looking for maps of the area. I'm interested in class inequity in these rural regions and have the Yadkin Pee River Basin, which is here in the central Piedmont region in North Carolina. I stumbled across yearbooks and I began playing around with yearbooks in the time frame of the 1950s. What I was doing then is I was taking different pictures, from unknown yearbook photographers. And then I would begin to like collage these two spaces, like the space of like a black school, a space of the white school, and collage them together and desegregate the space.
What was the biggest challenge in making this work?
I feel like my intentions talking about a place and talking about an issue with a place, racial and class segregation in an area that I'm not from, um, like the biggest challenge was like approaching that in a way with like tact and that I was like checking my own privilege, like really like making an effort to like push the work out toward people through exhibitions or through online platforms or whatever, and then getting feedback through that. I was actually really surprised at how well the work had been received, and it was like people appreciating the fact like, oh, like you're a white artist interested in this, talking about this, like yeah, it's definitely something that has a place, So I thought that was really cool.
You may address this in your statement, I don't know, but I'm wondering for the viewer that might be watching the interview, what is an example of one way that you, in your work, acknowledge your privilege?
I think it's just by like coming to terms with what I'm doing. But as far as like, oh, directly confronting my privilege within the work, I don't know if I directly do that. I think it's more so in ideas, and it probably comes through more subtly through the experience of um, making the work and
Yeah,
critiquing the work, being open to criticism.
thank you.
I don't know if that answered the question, like really hard question.
It's a hard question. I think it's an important question, and
Yeah.
I really appreciate you engaging with it. I think that now we all are trying to be so much more aware, and as we learn, just the process is awkward,
Right.
really important. So I'm glad. Thank you for talking about it.
Ask you a question really quick, just something that came to my mind. Have you received input or feedback or criticism from the Black community there?
Yeah. So I mean, not directly like anything specific, but so I mean, here in my job, I'm an instructor, full-time instructor at a community college here in the Central Piedmont region in North Carolina. So for being at a community college, it's very like racially diverse. There's such a diversity in class here. Um, we were working on this project titled like the Here's My Story Bench. We got like a grant for like a public installation. The past 3 years, we've been recording these interviews with people from, and this is like such a broad statement, marginalized communities here in Rowan County where we live. And like when I say marginalized communities, I mean we interviewed the first African American female high school teacher in North Carolina. We interviewed two gentlemen who became friends after their high schools like desegregated and integrated together. We interviewed people from the trans community, from here in small town rural North Carolina. So yeah, so and I mean they're familiar. They become familiar in getting to know me with my work and what I do. And it's so interesting, like their feedback to me, talking to them about it and them being like, oh wow, this is crazy, like, and having them look back at like their yearbook. Um, I think it's so, I don't know. I think it's like that to me, having that feedback or those conversations, it's just as valuable as having conversations within like the art community where like people will give me feedback or criticism with like an artistic eye, because then it's like, hey, this is something like you can relate to.
This body of work is all about my personal relationship with gender. And that's something that's been in my life for a long time, kind of, that I didn't really dig into all that much personally. And my artwork for at least a decade before I started on this, things changed for me when the pandemic hit. And um, I also teach at a community college, and suddenly my classes are canceled. I'm not around anyone. Um, I have access to my studio, so I came and I was in my studio, and these thoughts about gender and my own experience of gender started coming to the forefront. Things that I'd been thinking about for a while and playing with in my head, but not making anything. And this really two things happening at once was making these artworks that were, there were some through lines, but they were very different. I was thinking about dance and about bodies and this sort of lived experience of your body existing in a certain way, but the felt experience of it maybe being something else. So I started layering images of people, nude figures of different genders layered over each other, kind of creating this sense of one person with multiple presentations, multiple felt identities in motion. And in making those, it really forced me, I mean, outside of the art, to really think about my own identity and who I am, and kind of just finally come to the word and say I'm non-binary, and kind of figure out what that means and what it is to me. So the terrible, horrible pandemic had that one at least good effect for me of giving me that space to shift in direction, that time and freedom. And those dancer paintings evolved into just other versions of that, other ways of thinking about bodies, felt experience, balance between opposing forces, or finding common ground.
What was the biggest challenge for you in making this work?
I had spent so much time making work where I felt that I was an outside force. I was the historian. I was the writer making a story about something else, and I wasn't there. It wasn't first person. So the two big challenges were putting myself figuratively in front of making artwork that's about me, questioning who I am. And also the artwork ended up leaning on photography a lot. So the other challenge was putting myself literally in front of the camera, because I ended up modeling for at least a lot of the later pieces, the multiple figure pieces.
Any other surprises that you didn't talk about that you want to talk about now?
I think one of the things that surprised me when I started putting the work out, of sharing the work, is that there was an acceptance of it, the pretty fast acceptance of it. And being non-binary or genderqueer or gender non-conforming really means can mean very different things to different people. So I wasn't trying to represent that as a universal, but represent my own experience of gender, which is complicated for me and complicated in different ways for others. But I got a lot of feedback from other people who are going through similar things, who were like, that really resonated with me. And it was, maybe it shouldn't have been surprising, but it was, at least it was surprising. And it was nice to kind of make that connection through the thing that I made.
Well, I've always been very aware of my bicultural heritage. You know, growing up in a rural area in the United States, you know, I think people see differences. So I was always, you know, seen as that Japanese kid, that Jap, and so I always, you know, thought, oh well, one day I'm going to get to go to Japan, and there will be my people. And finally, I did get to go to Japan, and people would look at me and go, "Oh, who's that white guy?" And I realized I didn't belong there either. That I was kind of this hybrid that was either both or neither nor. But a lot of my relatives are in Hawaii. My mother was born there, and there's a term hapahaole, which means half Asian, half white. And because of where Hawaii is, there's a huge population, and that's one of the few places that I actually just blend in. So but to get back to the project specifically, you know, as my mother has aged and her siblings have aged, they've gotten more and more into archiving the family legacy, and all these old photos have been surfacing. And I was looking at these two archives of one photos on my father's side of the family, this old New England Waspy family, and then this old, you know, samurai family from Japan, and realizing that in the 19th century, from where as far back as these photos go, these families had no idea that their fates would intersect. And I just found that so fascinating. And also that both sides would have been horrified at the idea. And they're both like very, you know, like kind of racially pure traditions. So I started just kind of moving photos around and kind of playing with them. But of course, you know, I don't want to damage them. So I scanned them and started creating these kind of fantasy relationships, sort of fake things, you know, putting people in the same frame who never were before. And, you know, listening to my older relatives talk about the family legacy, there's a lot of disagreement about, you know, who did what, when, where people came from, you know, whether someone was, you know, had this honorable past or one that was, you know, a criminal past. And so I was realizing, well, family histories are pretty much made up. So I felt that gave me a lot of license to, or I guess artistic license to play with the photographs and not worry about historical fact. So there's just kind of a lot of play in the pictures, but it's kind of like, you know, based on that idea of, I guess you know, it's as truthful as anything that families make up about their past.
What were the biggest challenges, or what was the biggest challenge in making this work?
Biggest challenge. You know, it's there are many challenges. I don't know if any one of them is the largest. One was actually trying to figure out how to display and exhibit the work. You know, I've been, you know, as I mentioned, scanning the old photographs and arranging them in Photoshop, and you know, there are a lot of gaps. So kind of like in Jurassic Park, where they use frog DNA to fill in the blanks in the dinosaur sequences. When I didn't have the photos I needed, I would just, you know, get them from thrift shops, or I would take my own photos and drop them in. So there's like mixes and matches in there. But the problem I've always had with digital prints is that every single one is exactly the same. That once you make one print and you make another and another, it's like pressing CDs. So there's no variation between them. And I've always found that rather unsatisfying. So I was looking for a process that would allow variation and randomness. And that's why I started doing this, what I call alcohol transfers. It's by a company called DOS. And, so the photos or the finished collages are initially printed out on transparencies. And then that is immersed in this alcohol matrix then that allows it to be transferred to watercolor paper. And it's very imperfect. It's messy. There's a lot that goes wrong. I end up like throwing out a lot of them, but and so I think that's the biggest challenge is like trying to figure out how to make each picture unique.
What was the biggest aha moment in making the work?
The way the show has come together is the epiphany, because when I first started, I didn't have this idea of making it about myself and my family. I was actually just looking at old photos and mixing and matching them. And so a lot of it had nothing to do with my ancestry. And as they kind of came together, they were kind of cool looking, but they weren't linked by any theme. But I started bringing in family photos, and that sort of became the theme. And that was the epiphany, was realizing, oh, I could do this about the family.
Were there any other surprises that happened in the work that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. There's been a lot of talk, especially in the art world, about like post-colonial theory, about looking back at the past and not putting, people like Columbus or James Cook or Lewis and Clark up on a pedestal, because they actually also caused a lot of tragedy and damage. But I'm looking at my two halves of my family. One, crossed the Atlantic to come to the US, and the other crossed the Pacific to come to Hawaii. And so there are like these forces that are pushing families across. And, of course, I don't think either side had any malintent, but that for all the bad press that colonialism had, I'm actually the result of it. So I wouldn't exist if these families hadn't been pressured to leave their homes. So there is a lot that's sort of buffeted along, I think, beyond our control. And I think the most recent imagery that I have in the show is taken from the World War II era. I had relatives who were on both sides of the conflict. And I was also thinking about that too, that they were also, both sides loved their countries, but they were both, patriotic for both sides, but, as they were kind of buffeted along by circumstances beyond their control. So I think as we are players in history, we sort of find ourselves on the stage, but we don't really get to choose that stage.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to art students?
No matter what type of art you're making, your making process should be rooted in your experience in some way, shape, or form.
Be passionate about art, but collect other passions as well. Your love for art will fail you at times, and you won't know what to do. But if you have other things that you love, I mean, for me, music, dance, it's you can lean on those things, and you can rope them into the things that you're making and find inspiration, or you can just have a happy life with them while you figure things out.
I think it's really, really important to look at a lot of work. I mean, you have stuff that you love, and then it might be like one artist or like one source, but get outside that. And if where you like to look at art is on Instagram, great, but then go to the museum, go to the galleries, go to somewhere where it's unexpected. Maybe it's an art.
What's next for you?
I recently began a new project. Has to do more with like the textile industry here in the Central Piedmont region in North Carolina. You know, and obviously like the textile industry being based on like, you know, slave cotton production and its relationship to the South. And
So where can people find your work?
my website, parkerrenikerphoto.com,
Okay.
and my Instagram at @in_the_park_.
I'm definitely still, I would say, in the middle of the body of work that I've been doing. I haven't run into a wall yet, but similar to Parker, I'm thinking about exploring some different spaces with it, particularly with the floral and kind of segmented limb pieces that I've been working on. Thinking of ways to take that into an installation or three-dimensional object and include some form of interactive music.
Where can people find your work?
They can see my website at michaelhubbardart.com and Instagram at michael_hubbard_art.
Okay. Okay.
There's the immersive project that I'm
Yeah.
working on with the animated collages. I'm actually hoping to spend my sabbatical on that, some time off from teaching, and spending at least like a semester just working on that. I've done some work with video projection and installations, but not really a comprehensive extended, like not for a whole exhibition. It would be just one-offs. So I really want to explore photography without coming back to printing on paper, which is outside my comfort zone, because
Yeah.
I am so, like, my mindset, my ideology is so based on that picture on the frame that goes on the wall, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be. And I think it's actually more important to be thinking about all possibilities. I mean, not only do photographs not have to be printed, but they don't have to be static either. They can move.
Where can people find your work?
Well, my website is staffordsmith.net. That's where I kind of formally present work. And my Instagram handle is at Mista Hiroshi. But that's less, sometimes it's artsy, sometimes, you know, it's a mishmash. It's whatever catches my eye at the moment. So
Okay.
it might be pictures of my dog, but it might be art, you don't know, or some
I love that.
interesting thing I've seen on the street. So it's a mess, it's a messy thing.